Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Today's episode of Centered features a conversation between Kyra and I. Today, we're talking about the toxic relationship between narcissists and empaths. As an energy healer and tarot reader, I'm privy to intimate details from people's lives. Kyra is a working therapist, a tarot reader, and she also talks to people all the time about the dynamics that are going on in their personal relationships. People often come to me to shift energy, change dynamics, figure out a path forward to healing, and they'll often talk about their childhoods, their romantic relationships, their friendships. Even in my own life, I've had friends and family describe their toxic relationship or talk about an ex or what they're going through, and they seem to be describing their partners as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I think this is just another empath trapped in the dark web of a narcissist. And it sounds like I'm dismissing these situations. They're really intense and really difficult to heal from. And often empaths will find themselves repeatedly in relationships with narcissists. So I just was really curious as to why. Why does this happen to the nicest people, the kindest people, the most compassionate people? So I started doing a little research, reading about this toxic pairing. I remember the first one I read about was in the Elephant Journal. And I just went down a rabbit hole after that, following people on YouTube and on other social media platforms that specifically talk about this dynamic because it is so common. So I really began this conversation with Kyra many years ago because I would just talk about narcissists, like, oh, that guy is, really sounds like he's a narcissist or on the spectrum of narcissism. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the episode. But, Kyra has training as a social worker and she's a therapist. And she was frontline to these situations quite often because she worked in domestic violence and in rape crisis. So it just put her face to face with the darkest parts of this relationship. So I asked her, would you like to talk about it for an episode? And she was a little hesitant actually at first because, it is a complex situation. And while we often will just kind of talk about these issues, everybody has to heal. There isn't a bad guy or a good guy. And you'll hear us talking about that a lot. We aren't blaming the abuser, but we are saying there are things that we can do so we don't fall into, as empaths, that we don't fall into relationships with narcissists. So I just wanted to make that little disclaimer because I think that you could listen to this episode and think that we're blaming the empath, but I think we see the ability of the empath to change and to heal. They're kind of more situated to be able to do that, whereas narcissists aren't as capable of self-awareness. Not to say there aren't narcissists who do heal. There definitely is, but we're interested in the empath. That's who come to see us most often. So let's just define this quickly. A narcissist is someone who's self-absorbed and they lack the ability to empathize with others. It's a personality disorder, but it's also a spectrum disorder. And we do define this a little more in the episode. They tend to get their worth through external means. So I love this quote by Emily Levine because it kind of wraps this up. She said, "I thought narcissism was about self-love until someone told me that there's a flip side to it. It's actually drearier than self-love. It's unrequited self-love." And I think that sort of encapsulates narcissism. An empath, on the other hand, finds it very easy to relate to other people's feelings, and they're defined by the fact that they feel what other people feel. They sometimes can't even discern their own feelings because they care so much about other people's feelings that they put themselves on the back burner. And so you can see how this relationship could really feed each other. There are definitely shadow aspects of empaths, and there's, um, we tend to put empaths on a pedestal in our community, but I just want you to know we have deep compassion for the empath. Um, and especially because they're usually on the receiving end of this abuse, but we are definitely holding empaths responsible for being able to change their behavior. So I just want you to know that, this is by no means a definitive study of the narcissist and the empath. We're just having a conversation, and we're not claiming to be experts in any way, shape, or form. So there's your second disclaimer. But in case you forgot, we also have a record button on our Anchor page. So if you have questions for us about something we talk about or something you just would like to know more about, um, please record a question. You can also email us at angie@themoonandstone.com. You can record on your phone and then email it to me at that same address. You can find Kyra at awintarot.com, and you can find me at angieyingst.com. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the toxic relationship between empaths and narcissists. Maybe we should just define these terms that we're going to use, because even so we're talking about narcissism, but we're talking about empath. And I think empath is one of those words too that gets really confused. So let's start with narcissist.
Yeah.
The way I use narcissist, because I think it's really misused, and I even use it in ways that are probably misused, but it's narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder, but it's also considered a spectrum disorder. So it has a continuum from like mild narcissistic tendencies to like malignant narcissism. And so the way I define narcissist is it's a person who thinks of other people as objects rather than people. And they use other people as ways to fulfill unmet needs of attention and admiration and idealization.
Yeah.
Is that how you see it?
Yeah. And then
They also get their worth from their partnerships, right?
yeah, well, from external validation. Yeah, so it could be like, their trophy wife, or it could be their nice car, or it could be their degree, or it could be their whatever. Yeah.
And they do have some of the same tendencies, which is self-importance, lack of empathy.
Yeah. Delusions of grandiosity.
Yeah, delusions of
Delusions of grandeur.
They need admiration,
Yes.
entitlement,
Yeah.
shows arrogance, and then envious of others. Well, I think comparing to others all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, like pathologically envious and just constantly comparing. Well, and they really have a really fragile kind of sense of identity a lot of times, because a lot of times they'll be like chameleons, or like wear your skin sort of creepy stuff.
Yeah. The wear your skin is, I don't know, it's just such a strong image for me. I like it because,
and oh my god, I've had a couple, believe it or not, and I think it's because of my ability to be like just completely gaslit and manipulated. Like, I have had more than a couple wear your skin type of people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, suddenly they have the same hair and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So grody. And that's the thing about narcissists, is actually they kind of need an empath. They need the other side of the coin, or the cycle doesn't work.
Yeah, they need someone who has like maybe a lack of external confidence like they have, but internally has like more of a developed sense of self.
Yeah. So let's define an empath. So, and I kind of go back and forth with this, because sometimes Like now, I think more people are referring to them as highly sensitive people,
Yeah, yeah.
but empaths are, we kind of use it in the metaphysical community a lot. And we act like it's like a gift. And, what's your gift? Is it empathy? And like, it's funny because to me, empaths aren't born. It isn't always a gift. It's like usually a result of trauma
Hmm.
because the hypervigilance of another person's emotions is really a sign of like trauma, right?
Exactly. Well, yeah, and I mean, really, it's like I tell my clients who are empaths or who really identify that way all the time that it's like, or do you have no boundaries
Right.
with your emotions? That it's
Yeah.
like you feel like you are responsible for the emotions of others, and that's why you're feeling them so strongly because it's my problem. I need to be the manager of all of that. And yeah, you're exactly right. Like that comes from an abusive environment of like, I'm this small child with neglectful or abusive or immature parents, and I'm trying to manage their feelings.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, an empath, how we define it, is just someone who's really highly sensitive to other
Mhm.
people's emotions and feels a deep empathy or uh, compassion for other people. And they
Yeah.
often feel the emotions of other people as their own.
Yeah.
That's where it becomes dark, I think,
Right. Well,
because
and I was going to say that I had found a thing that was talking about the difference too, even between like emotional empathy and cognitive empathy too. That it's like when you meet people, there's on one hand that they can appear to be an empath, but maybe not be. And
Mhm.
then there's also the fact that empaths themselves, that doesn't necessarily mean not a predatory person.
Right. Yes. I mean, to me, empath and codependent are almost one and the same most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say that usually when you talk to someone who's like, "Oh, I'm an empath," you're probably looking at, "I have codependency
Yeah, and I mean,
issues." Yeah.
a lot of people don't understand codependency because they think it only applies to like drug and alcohol,
Oh, yeah.
like being a partner or a parent or something, by helping them use their substance of choice. But it really is any relationship where someone's so invested in the other person that it becomes their identity.
Exactly.
And oh my gosh, I know so many people like that. And I've been in relationships that have been deeply
I was
codependent.
gonna say me.
You can almost think of it as like if the other person is addicted to the self or the ego as a narcissist, the codependent is addicted to that person.
Mhm. Yeah, and sometimes I've even seen situations because everyone thinks of the empath and narcissist dynamic as like the abusive narcissist, the codependent empath, just trying to like, manage the narcissist's emotions. But what I've
Yeah.
also seen is the abusive, privacy invading, any sense of agency stomping empath, so to speak, who is perhaps involved with maybe self absorbed narcissist, but that self absorbed narcissist, we're talking in the sense of like a 3-year-old being self absorbed.
Right.
Like and I mean, like, yeah, they are. And I think that also makes them the perfect target.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen that one quite a few times and it really gets missed.
Yeah. I mean, not to talk in kinkster terms, but it's like it's like topping from the bottom, you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like
topping
really.
from the bottom.
um
Well,
uh,
yeah, I mean, seriously, I can't tell you, just with working with like different families and everything like that. There's been a couple different dynamics, but there's definitely been dynamics where like the father, for example, may be more narcissistic, or the mother may be more narcissistic, or one of the partners may be more narcissistic or whatever, and they appear to be in charge, right? Like from an external point of view, they appear to be like, oh, this is the one who makes money, or this is the one who has the degree. And so you think that they're in charge,
Right.
but they're not, because they're bottoming from the top.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Well, and it's
um
interesting. You see it in alcoholic families a lot, where a
yeah,
narcissist is the alcoholic, right? Where
yeah,
they're just distant and not there, right?
right.
But the codependent or the empath is the one going, we have to get everything in order before your father gets home, because if he sees anything, he's going to drink more, right? Like, it's like
Right.
now they're training their children to be little codependents, and everything has to be perfect for the narcissist, and it ends up becoming like an abusive, neglectful situation for the children because their needs are getting ignored.
Exactly.
100%.
Exactly. Yeah, and for kids in those situations, it's so confusing because it's like, are you more angry at the codependent parent or the alcoholic parent? It's like, because it's
Yeah, it's
like
hard.
sometimes what can happen in those situations, I've had situations where a kid will feel really angry at the narcissistic parent who is maybe the actually less harmful one, in terms of like overt harm.
Right.
But they'll feel more angry at that one because it almost feels safer to be angry at that one.
Yeah.
And so all the anger will be directed there, and then none at the codependent one, where they'll agree with the codependent one, like, yeah, he's a, lazy scumbag, good for nothing, and
Yeah.
then they'll ally themselves with the mom, but then still feel very frustrated.
Right.
Or,
That's
you know,
that's that kind of covert narcissism though, where it's
yeah.
like, I'm going to like alienate you from the other parent, and I'm
Oh,
going
yeah.
to like, control how you think about me by
Yeah.
controlling how you think about that person.
And it's funny because it's like, when we think about narcissism and empathy, we always seem to think of it as like different like prototypes of people, but it's really not. Like we all are potentially narcissists and
Yeah.
empaths. We all have that within us. And really, those things are on the same spectrum, narcissism being one end, empathy being the other. It's almost kind of like, I mean, it's like two sides of the same coin, is what we're
Yeah.
talking. Like, at what point does empathy become, um, like, even cognitive empathy being
Yeah.
manipulated to be covert narcissistic tactics.
Yeah. Because it
And
can
it's
be totally toxic in that way that you're just talking about.
Yeah. And just because someone's an empath doesn't mean that they can't use a narcissist's playbook.
Yeah, in fact, they're quite versed in it usually.
Yeah, because they know so much.
Yeah.
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 The part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I cannot tell you how often I have clients in my tarot business and on my table who are recovering, quote unquote, recovering from narcissistic abuse,
Mhm.
or whose exes are narcissists.
Yeah,
And it's so pervasive
it
that
is.
and I think it's because people that are empathic or highly sensitive are attuned to energy, and so they do come to energy healers a little more frequently.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So it's like, there's just such a rash of this that I started doing a little bit of research, just saying like, what is this relationship
Yeah.
between the narcissist and the empath? Like, what is it? And then kind of understanding like, the narcissist actually preys on people who will see the light in them, and see the good.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's that whole thing that like we were saying about like, the narcissist has like the external, like confidence
Yeah.
or, projected image, but the empath is the one a lot of times with the more like internal kind of attunement and everything. And it's like they're totally drawn to each other for that reason. And yeah, like, totally one of the most common dynamics is the narcissist just completely milking the empath dry,
Yeah.
and exploiting them, and even possibly abusing and beating them down in the process. But yeah, it is really interesting because in a way they're both kind of trying to leech off one another.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because for the empath who maybe grew up with a lot of abuse and maybe has complex trauma and everything. I mean,
Yeah.
probably they both do, but
The
focusing
narcissist
on
just
the
can't feel it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that narcissist isn't gonna even get anywhere near that, but the
Yeah.
empath is maybe a little bit, it's maybe worn a little bit more on their sleeve that they have this more like they're more fragile when it comes to their ability to assert themselves and everything. It's it is in this like it is a parasitic relationship, but that's not to say that anyone is bad or
Right.
anything. It's like it makes sense why the empath feels like, please, I need a safe supportive structure. And that kind of looks like that because confidence seems
Yeah.
to know, seems to yeah, just have an assured nature about themselves.
And the narcissist does provide a framework of love that
Yeah,
because the way to kind of, get into a relationship is they do the things that look like a relationship. They're getting in
right.
there. And then the second there's intimacy, they're like, why are you a piece of shit? Like
Yeah,
they're it's that love bombing thing where they really know how to manipulate and make you feel special. I mean,
right.
there isn't a narcissist out there that doesn't know how to make someone feel
Oh,
good.
yeah.
That's why they're so
Yes.
addictive, if they were it's the same thing that when people come into recovery, it sometimes it makes it sound like drinking isn't fun. The whole reason that alcoholics drink is because they like to drink, and the whole reason the empath seeks, or continues to have a relationship with the narcissist is because the love bombing is so good.
Yes. It's
And
so good and so methodical.
yeah, and I mean
Yeah.
that person, I think you're right in that narcissists know how to read people in the same
Oh,
way
yeah.
empaths do.
Yeah.
They know your weaknesses, they know your
Mhm.
strengths, and that's why their love and their pain are
Mhm.
so deep often.
Right. It's like, if they know that you are insecure about your body, for example, in the beginning of the relationship, they'll, do all these things to show how, supportive they are of
Yeah.
of your body and how much they love it and everything. And then you can be guaranteed that that will be the thing that comes under fire when the tables turn, and they will.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that frustrates me, and I don't want to be too hard on um the empath or the person who's abused by a narcissist, but I just naming the narcissist as an abuser can sometimes be very helpful for a
Oh,
client.
absolutely. It's
But
so
it
helpful.
doesn't end there. It's
No.
like that's when you're like, a lot of people do end there though. They're just like, "Oh, my ex was a narcissist and I'm done," and
Mhm.
they leave, but they never fix the underlying
Yeah.
issue. So the next time they may pick a covert narcissist or someone who's not so far out there, they may see some red flags, but they keep falling into the same relationships over and over and over again because underlying it is like what you said, it's complex PTSD, it's abuse from childhood. There's a lot of stuff underneath it,
Mhm.
and it requires a lot of like very honest shadow work to
Yeah.
go deep into that um, dynamic and where it comes from and how to stop it.
Well, yeah, because I mean, honestly, even some of it starts to look a little bit ugly
Yeah.
because a lot of times empaths, perhaps they were raised in a narcissistic family.
Yeah.
So that means that the narcissism lives within them. It means that that's what tells them which partners to choose, for example, early on. And so that means that their choice in partners might be narcissistic,
Yeah.
right? Like I want the person who is tall, dark, and handsome and accomplished. And it's like, are you going to be real about that or not? That perhaps even the draw and the romance of it all was a little bit of a narcissistic fantasy.
Oh my God, yes. That is so good. It's kind of like the fantasy of what is that book that was really famous, the bondage book?
What?
Do you know that book that was like oh, I didn't read it because it was apparently bad. Oh, 50 Shades of
Oh,
Grey.
50. The bondage book.
Isn't that what it is about? I don't even know.
It's like a really bad like not good BDSM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like that that whole thing is so the narcissist and the empath, right? Like
Oh my God. Yes.
it's like,
Oh my
oh, there's
God.
this
She's
guy who ignores me and who's rude to me and who's distant and cold, and I'm gonna let him do whatever he wants to me, and then maybe he'll marry me one day.
right. And it's like this amazing romantic fantasy. Oh my God. Like I would just
Yeah.
love to have that happen. Like, what? She's literally a gazelle trapped by a lion.
Yeah.
Like, this is a predator.
Yep. Yep.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that, like for in that situation, like we're not saying that she is now a narcissist, but if she were to do some deep shadow examination, I think that she would realize that the voice that was telling her that he was a good choice is narcissistic.
Right, because he's the one everybody wants, but he's distant, and
Right, right.
you see that a lot, like in when people explain it, like he was so handsome and he was paying attention to me.
Hmm.
Like they
Right.
even describe it that way, where it's like I'm not as, whatever. I didn't think he would pay attention to me. And then next thing you know, this is a narcissist.
Right.
Yeah.
That's always the beginning of the narcissist story.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are gifts in that though, because there's something that like the empath doesn't really realize. And it's like, um, I actually really like Tangled, like Disney,
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
Tangled movie. Um, with her mom, quote unquote.
The narcissist mom.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
narcissist mom that she has that like keeps her because like her hair has these like, youth preserving, healing, magical powers.
Yeah.
And like the mom constantly kind of like degrades her and convinces her that like she's not safe to go outside and just like all these different things. But that's kind of the thing with the empath and the narcissist too, if that's the situation that's happened, is that if you've drawn in perhaps like a evil witch or evil sorcerer who wants something, then it means that there is something they want.
Right. Right.
There's something they want. And so you're there thinking, oh my gosh, this person's talking to me. And I didn't even think that they would give me the time of day. But in reality, how much of that is your reflection of what they were actually kind of thinking to some extent?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times that's why they're drawn in. They're like, I need to hook this person, and for good reason.
Yeah. One of the things that for me is that I notice that I'm like, I've had this in friendships, maybe even more than intimate relationships.
Right. Like even more. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, I remember my therapist kind of going like, well, so why? Like, what are you attracted to about the person? And when I list out all the things that I'm attracted to, they're wonderful things: independence
Yes.
and decisiveness and confidence and blah, 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 blah. But to me, like having grown up in an alcoholic family, like I don't even know what real confidence looked like. Do you know what
Right.
I mean? I only
Right.
knew what narcissistic confidence looked like.
Right.
But like, I ended up marrying someone who's not a narcissist, who's confident, and that
Mhm.
person never tells me how good they are. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
He
Yeah.
just is
That's
good. He's just strong and he makes decisions and he doesn't feel the need to tell me repeatedly how good he is.
oh my gosh, that's such a good point. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, the friendship thing was a hard one for me to understand because I was like, I kind of feel like not that they were abusive, but like they were very, very painful to
Yeah.
go through.
Yeah. Well, and I can
Um,
say like I've had some close friendships that now looking back on it, they genuinely were abusive and they were like abusive boyfriends. I mean, even just in the level of, isolating me from other friends, monopolizing my time, things like that.
yeah.
That it's like I'm like, wow, and that was the thing for me because when it was friendships, I was like, if this were a boyfriend, I would say this is an abusive relationship, but this is like my best friend or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's really hard to miss. Well, and I've even experienced it in the workplace
Oh,
too.
for sure.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like narcissistic coworkers and everything, and the abuse that they can put you through.
Yeah. That I think is probably where people who aren't empaths and who don't grow up in dysfunctional families run into narcissists most often
Oh yeah.
because they may be good at picking their partner, but then they go into this workforce and they're not picking the people they're working with. They're just forced to be next to these super toxic people. And I get a lot of that too, people saying like, how do I protect myself against these toxic people at work? And it's like, dude, it's just
You go work for yourself.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about some things that narcissists do in relationship that can be like kind of those red flags. So I have like 5 things that I wrote down. So they make you feel special
Oh yeah, that's a
and
good
they love
one.
yeah.
Yes. And that's so good too because most of the red flags with narcissists, like they're going to be things that are either like easily mixed up because they look good or because they're so like I don't know, like just foggy and whatever that it's like it's almost easy to miss if you're not good at like discerning your own feelings.
Oh,
And so it's
absolutely.
like, that's what like the love bombing. I know even with love bombing, more recently, I think I had a situation where someone was love bombing me. And the way and it's interesting because I've had that happen in the past. Um and I would be fooled by it, of course, because I didn't know. Especially in friendships, actually, big time. But I had it happen in more recently. And it was interesting because now that I have done a little bit more work around this and become consciously more aware of it, like it actually felt gross from the start.
Yes.
It really did.
I know. I used to work in like a corporation, and I remember this person started and she was like, I feel like you're going to be my new best friend. And like, we have so much in common. I mean, this is like 12 hours after, I got to know her for the first time or whatever, 24 hours. It was like second day of her work, she's telling me that we're going to be best friends and everything. And it was like every hair on my body was standing up. And I'm just like, I just don't move that fast. Like I need time to get
Mm.
to know you. I'm more like an injured animal rather than, yes, I'll be your best friend. And I was because I didn't respond with like, yes, we're going to be best friends and go out drinking every night and blah, 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 tell each other secrets and braid each other's hair. Um, I was then like completely shunned from her. So
Yep.
it was like hot and cold. That's another one I have written down. They play hot and cold
Ooh,
games,
yes,
you
yes,
know.
yes. Oh, that story is oof. Yeah, you're exactly right though, because like when I was younger and I had been more conditioned for this
Yeah.
stuff, like I would be like, "Oh my God, that's so sweet of her."
I
Well, then
know.
even when I started to get to where like, I don't like it, I was still like, "Yeah, but Kira, you're a bitch if you're going to, be mean to this really nice lady." But yeah,
That's the part that's hard. And that's what
Yeah.
empaths can't handle. Is
Yeah.
that's the narcissistic part of empaths. It's like, but my personal reputation, but like, what will people think of me?
Right, right.
Where
Well,
it's like, I just got labeled like being the bitch, but the truth is like I'm here to work, and I love that friendships happen at work, but
right.
this
When
isn't
they
how
happen.
how I start work.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, and that's a whole thing that we've
Yeah.
talked about too. It's like,
We were kind of talking about it before.
yeah, like
Here's like a
there's
moment.
work people, like work is work.
Yeah. I'm not, but that's one of my downfalls of like life, is that I'm not great at that. I'm not great at faking things. If I'm unhappy, most people know it.
Oh, I'm starting to get there. I think I was a big old fibber with with my emotions before, but no,
Mm.
it's funny too because it's like just thinking about that, like I mean it really is deceptive. Like when us empaths are not being honest about how we really feel, like that's deceitful.
Yeah. I remember my shamanic teacher said about everybody was talking about being an empath. And she goes, I want to ask you this, and I really want you to think about it. I don't want you to answer. But she was like, what if feeling other people's emotions is unethical? Like,
Yes.
we're taking away their ability to just be present in their emotions without having to tend to us, you know.
Yes.
And I feel that way all the time, like especially after I lost my daughter, which was probably like my most intensely narcissistic period, right? But it also made me highly attuned to how people like my needs. And so it wasn't, I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I just think grief is narcissistic in its design. But um, when I would tell somebody, oh, yeah, I'm really grieving because my daughter died, they would start crying. And then I would be like, it's okay. Like,
Right.
it's like your kid didn't even die. Like, it was my kid that died. Like, why
Hmm.
are you crying over my loss?
Hmm.
And I understood why. It's so sad and they don't know what to say and they're feeling
Right.
deep empathy. But on the other hand, it really took away my own grieving.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like I've had many instances like that. I even have something more recent that's been going on where I've been, breaking news to some
Yeah.
people and everything. And it's like it's one of these things, and it's funny too because it's something that could be perceived as bad, and yet that's not how anyone who's actually in the situation feels about it.
Right.
And then there's all these people being like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry," and like
Yeah.
crying and stuff. And I'm like, that actually feels really icky, prying, and
Yeah.
invasive and violating. Because this is my thing, not yours. So
Yeah.
could you please, like, you're allowed to have your own feelings about it, but please do that away from the people immediately impacted by this. Like,
Amen. I feel that way. Like, I was thinking about that the other day because I remember when I first started doing tarot readings, and I would get a card like the marriage card. And I would just be like, that person wants to get married. Like, you're going to get married. And they'd be like, what? I don't want to get married. And it was like me projecting my
yeah.
feelings onto them. And I started uh, looking at those cards and saying, how do you feel about marriage? Instead
That's
of,
perfect. I love it.
just like, this is just a jumping off point. But
It's
like,
funny because that totally is your approach. Like
yeah,
anytime we've like done readings or anything, you're like, so how do you feel
yeah.
about
It's because like I don't want to project, like my feelings of excitement about something are not necessarily somebody else's. So,
Right.
if I'm um going through something, like for example, if my doctor said, I think it might be time to have a hysterectomy, I would be like, oh my God, thank God. I am so sick of having this uterus.
I'm so fucking tired of it.
But like, that would normally be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you.
Right, they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
just
It's
take
must be
it. I
so
don't need
hard."
this
And it's
anymore.
like, I swear to God, yeah. It's so funny.
All right, other things narcissists do, they gaslight. So gaslight is a word that's
Oh, yeah.
totally overused,
Yeah.
but
And
that is their hallmark.
it is. Well, and it's funny because gaslighting, like in the way that I've experienced it in my life, it actually because of what it is, because it literally puts everything into a fog. It's like it, it actually is really hard to tell sometimes when it's happening
Yeah.
because it usually isn't like this overt thing. It's
Yeah.
like because there will be things like um that will say that even like kind of like, we'll say immature ways of handling conflict, they'll say it's gaslighting. But
Yeah.
like real gaslighting is much more insidious than that and
Yeah.
really hard to spot and is something that is like deep like manipulation of feelings
Mhm.
and like sense of self and trust in the self. And if you grow up in
Right.
like a narcissistic family, it's something that it's like it erodes the person, from the get-go. And it's, in fairy tales when, like Sleeping Beauty is under a spell, like that's what we mean, like that they're under the spell of like, everything's normal, it's fine,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I mean, as a parent, I think it's like parenting is taught. You're almost taught to gaslight your children, which is like
Yes.
very difficult to like when I started noticing this, it was like my child's like, I am so sad that I have to go to school, or I just don't want to go to school. I'm afraid. I'm like, no, you're not afraid. You just don't want to go to school. But maybe they are afraid. Maybe they
Right.
are afraid of doing something they don't want to do. And I've just said, no, you're not. That's a form of gaslighting. You're basically trying to convince somebody to feel something else, and that they can't trust their own emotions. They can't trust you know, add anything in there, even like hunger cues. Like, no, you're not full. You need to finish eating everything on your plate. Like, that's another way
Right.
we gaslight children.
Right.
But
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's, a lot of gaslighting, even in families that maybe we wouldn't term as being completely narcissistic. It's like, the gaslighting just happens. I mean, it permeates our entire culture, which is narcissistic.
yeah,
Um, our
yeah.
society is narcissistic. Um, but yeah, it's like it comes out in those ways of like constantly telling children to doubt their feelings and
Hmm.
their instincts. And yeah, it really does a number on us. But
Yeah.
a lot of parenting methods of the past, like, yeah, it really has been narcissistic abuse because so it's like, okay, cool, let's get rid of corporal punishment and spanking, which I agree we should, but let's replace it with this like extremely toxic, shaming, narcissistic control.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, then we do that exclusively. And it's like, I mean, a lot of times the corporal punishment would go with that too, but it's like, some of the methods that they taught really were like narcissistic abuse. Um,
Totally. And
yeah.
even now you kind of hear echoes of it when you hear Gen Xers or boomers like kids today can't handle anything. Like we were,
Yes.
and they'll start going on the long tirade of like how spoiled millennials and Gen Zers are. And I was just like, they're actually feeling feelings and they're not getting bullied anymore. And they're, like they're not putting up with like, how are you thinking that this is okay? But
Right.
in relationship, it really is destabilizing um, the partner's sense of sanity and perception,
Hmm.
right? So
Yep.
sometimes it's covering something like an affair by
Right.
someone seeing, oh, you got a text from a woman. It's like, you're so crazy. you're psychotic. Like you
Mm-hmm.
really think that you're so jealous, you
Yep.
really need help. It's
Yep.
that kind of thing. And it
Uh-huh.
can go all the way up until like just destabilizing them in the sense of like whether they're beautiful or attractive or smart or capable,
Right.
or it goes the whole length.
Right.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
um I know this sounds funny, but I was wondering, like, when we talk about personality disorders, like, could you talk a little bit about the difference between personality disorders and like neuroses, or
Okay, yeah.
do you know what I mean? Because I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I don't know.
Well, like a personality disorder, like, for example, like if someone's talking about, like hormonal or seasonal or cyclical kinds of things that seem to be like a deeper internal psychological, possibly like sort of thing going on, then that's going to be more of like, we're talking like bipolar disorder, mood
Yeah.
disorders, things like that, where it's like, okay, there's maybe, I'm not saying that this is my theoretical perspective, because honestly, like I hate the DSM
Yeah. Yeah.
entirely. But what I will say is that what the perspective is that like those are things that potentially there's maybe a chemical imbalance of some kind or something going on that you maybe can medicate or do other things to try to fix it. Whereas a personality disorder, although you can give, medication or whatever to help with, various other things like the depression or anxiety that might accompany it, it's more like patterns of personality that have formed as a result of, like your upbringing and personal experiences and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
like someone who has, borderline narcissistic, antisocial, avoidant, etc. personality disorder, chances are, like a psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist would give that diagnosis rather than say bipolar disorder if they felt that it was more related to like a maladaptive coping strategies for a toxic upbringing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's like clusters of personality disorders too that often mimic each other, right?
Mhm.
Like borderline looks like narcissism at times, right?
Yeah, because you have the cluster B personality disorders, and that is borderline, narcissistic, antisocial. Um, I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting one.
Um,
Histrionic.
oh God, yeah.
Yeah, histrionic. That's the other one.
I've
And
dealt
so
with a
like
couple of those.
yeah, I mean, all of them can kind of like they're in a cluster together because when you're narrowing down the diagnosis, like when you're like, okay, I think we're dealing with a personality disorder and it's going to be these types. These are the ones that have like the most interpersonal conflict and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, narcissists also use shock, awe, guilt, grooming. I guess those are kind of manipulations. They sort of
Mm-hmm.
fall under the gaslight thing, but
Oh,
um
absolutely. Yeah, because sometimes, a narcissist will do something, just awe-inspiring, right? Like they will take you out on the most elaborate, fancy date ever
yeah.
and like do all these special things. Or in terms of like the shock, they might do something really big, violent, rageful, animated, to kind of like get your attention. Like, I think about this with, like when abusers kind of use threatening suicide to manipulate. Like that's their like shock tactic
Yeah.
sometimes to like shock you into cooperating and doing what they want.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was in a relationship with someone who did that, and remember calling
Mm-hmm.
um and asking crisis intervention to check in on them, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, we're not going to check in on them because you're being abused and you need to never go back to that house, you know?
Yeah.
And I had never thought about that because I had so many people who did that kind of manipulation in my life at the time.
Right.
I
Yeah,
just,
you were literally conditioned for
yeah,
it. That's what
yeah,
I tell clients. It's like, a lot of us were trained like a dog, like Pavlov's dog. A bell rings and we drool, and we
yeah,
just like, yeah, we're like, that's, of course, this is just totally normal.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you, for I guess more on the energy work end or the tarot end, like the kind of cards I see are like the Eight of Swords and
The
um
devil.
the devil, right? Like I see those kind of cards, but like how do you help
um
someone shift?
well, I
Because
was even gonna say, just as an FYI to everyone, also the Seven of Cups, massively I get for this.
Seven of Cups. Yeah.
For narcissists. Yeah.
Interesting.
Narcissistic situations. Yep. Yeah. It's
I
like
can
it's all
totally
smoke and
s-
mirrors.
Yeah, that is so true, especially because they're in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
can
it's
totally
like,
see that.
yeah. Yeah. And all the shiny things. What do you want?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except for the
Um,
part that you can't see, which is you.
yeah. Yeah. So what did you say again?
I don't know. I mean, like when people come in, I do a lot of things. Like I do a lot of metaphoric shamanic work, like
Yeah.
cord cutting or working on like getting free. Like I
Yeah.
work with the concept of freedom a lot
Yeah.
with people and try to get them to work on their own
Mhm.
childhood stuff
Yeah.
and the shadow stuff.
Yeah.
Um, like what they get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely examining the shadow stuff in like whatever way this is, because um, there is something deeper going on here in these situations, and there is something, big and complex that we need to address internally. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like with clients who have experienced a lot of narcissistic abuse, like when it comes to therapy, or even doing things around working with, or integrating aspects of the shadow, we're really talking about even just like things like you said, freedom, and a sense of inner rage, like getting back in touch with that. Because a lot of times, in these situations, you have, we talked a lot about, of course, in the beginning we talked about when the that empaths are not always nicey nice, but then we
Yeah.
talked a lot about, but a lot of times it is a narcissist abusing an empath or exploiting them. But regardless of whichever way it goes, like, there's someone in this situation who is not in touch with their own like inner agency and like
Right.
sense of power, and a lot of that is attached to things like rage. Like, can you get mad that
Yeah.
this is happening? Can you learn how to fight for your life, basically?
It's such a good point because I think sometimes, when we are in codependent or, we're in an empathy, I should say, an empathy swirl or whatever, it's hard to even know what you're feeling, you know,
Right.
because it's so dependent on what the other person is doing that like
Yeah.
you first have to like figure out what am I actually feeling here? And anger is such a useful emotion in these cases,
Yeah.
rage is useful for shifting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was even just working with a client who was saying things about this, like in the context of a relationship, and it's like, well, I feel like I don't want to do that, or I don't want to have this role, or
Yeah.
I don't like that. But no, I feel like then I'm saying he's a bad person, and like, but he's not a bad person. And it's like, when we were talking about feeling feelings, they were like, well, I'm feeling my feelings. I'm feeling them constantly. And I'm like, but you're not, because every time it tries to like even just peek up to the surface to get some air, you're like, no, 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 he's nice, he's nice, he's nice.
That falls so into this like storytelling thing that happens with emotions. It's the cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
cannot exist, so it's like, if I feel love for that person, they can't be bad.
Right.
And so then there has to be a story that goes along with why that person was not
Right.
nice, and it has usually
Exactly.
nothing to do with us. That's the
Right.
other narcissist part of it, right?
And that I would say is also even sometimes the danger of some of these, like, situations where we're talking about the extremes of like empaths and narcissists, like, because the reality is that most people who have experienced narcissistic abuse have been gaslit to hell and back.
Yeah.
And the last thing they need to do is doubt whether or not it was narcissistic abuse.
Right.
That being said, I think it's like important to also note that anytime we're viewing things in these major polar extremes, we need to be like, is this for real?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, just like we're like, oh my God, they can't be the bad guy. It's like, why are we even conceptualizing that there has to be a bad guy all the time?
Yeah.
Sometimes we can feel emotionally depleted, violated, etc. by someone, but they are not a bad guy,
Yeah.
and sometimes they are.
I know. I mean, that's the hard part is, when I am seeing a client, like obviously I'm not doing therapy, but when I'm seeing a client, they're telling me their story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm taking their story. So to
Yep.
me, they're sounding narcissistic, right? That
Right.
the other
And we're
person.
like, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, if this person is truly has narcissistic personality disorder, it's very difficult to treat. You're not going to make that better. They have to go do the work and you need to do your work. So you basically have to go no contact and never talk to that person again. And they go, but what? Like, I no, they're like, they don't want to do that. And that's where it gets into trouble, where, you're like, well, maybe they're not telling me the whole story, because for me, if somebody told me this person's not capable of experiencing empathy, compassion, or even love for you,
Yeah.
that would be enough for me to be like, okay, then I am not going to spin my wheels here.
Right, exactly. And that's the funny thing too, is that, with this idea of like good guy, bad guy, it's like, again, with this idea that no one has, like, maybe someone doesn't have to be either, is like, maybe that is actually what gets us like spinning, like, are they not, are they not? And it's like, what if we just don't, and we just say, you know what, I don't like it, and that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Like, it doesn't feel good,
No.
and that is enough.
Well, I'm glad we talked about this.
Me too.
I've been wanting to do it, and I have, I've had that come up with some of my clients lately, and I
Yeah.
thought, oh gosh, this would be a good
Oh
time
yeah.
to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a good
And I'm
one.
like, I'm super stoked on to see that more people are talking about this. And
Yes.
thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie at themoonandstone.com.